The folder they slid across the table to me was thin enough to fold in one hand. My brother got one as thick as a phone book. My sister got one almost as thick. And then the lawyer's assistant walked the length of that long, polished table, past both of them, all the way down to where I was sitting near the door, and she set a single sheet of paper in front of me. One page. It made a small, papery sound when it landed, and in that quiet room, everyone heard it. My brother laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short breath through his nose, the kind of laugh you give when something is exactly as funny as you expected it to be. "Well," he said, "I think we know how this one's gonna go." I didn't move. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the way I had learned to keep them folded over the last 3 years, sitting beside hospital beds and kitchen tables and waiting rooms. I looked down at that single page, and I read the only line on it that mattered, and I felt the whole room turn toward me to watch my face fall. The line said I was to receive the garden shed and its contents. The garden shed. The little wooden building at the back of my mother's property, the one with the broken latch and the smell of old paint and a lawnmower nobody had used in years. That was my inheritance. After everything, that was the line my mother's estate had drawn around me. My sister put her hand over her mouth, but I saw her eyes, and her eyes were laughing. So, before I tell you how every single thing in that room turned over, and it did turn over completely, in a way none of them saw coming, let me take you back. Because a story like this doesn't start in a lawyer's office. It starts years before, in a quiet house, on 1,000 ordinary nights that nobody but me ever saw. My name is Hannah. I'm 34 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. The kind of apartment where you can hear the dryer spinning through the floor, and you stop noticing it after the first week. I'm not rich. I want to say that clearly, right at the start, because money is going to matter a lot in this story. And I need you to understand that I never had any. I worked as a dental hygienist. Steady job, decent people, nothing glamorous. I drove a 12-year-old car with a crack in the windshield that I kept telling myself I'd fix. And before I go on, if quiet stories like this are your kind of thing, you can subscribe. And tell me where in the world you're listening from. I had 2 siblings. My brother, Daniel, was the oldest. He was a regional sales manager for some company that sold software to hospitals, and he was very good at telling you how much he traveled. My sister Megan was the middle child. She did something in marketing that I never fully understood, and she lived 2 hours away in a nicer part of the state, in a house with a pool that her husband paid for. And then there was me, the youngest, the one who stayed close. I want to be fair here, because this is not a story about 3 monsters and 1 angel. My brother and my sister were not cruel people in the ordinary sense. They remembered birthdays, usually. They sent cards. Daniel could be funny at dinner. Megan once drove all the way out to help me move a couch years ago, and she didn't complain once. But there is a difference between people who love you and people who show up. And over time, I learned that difference the hard way. Because when our father died, that was 9 years ago now, a heart attack. Sudden. Gone before the ambulance even reached the house. It was just our mother left. And our mother was the strongest person any of us knew. She'd raised 3 kids, mostly on her own after the divorce. Worked 2 jobs to do it. Never once made us feel like a burden. She was the kind of woman who showed up to every recital, every game, every nothing little school event, sitting in the front row in a coat she'd had for 15 years. So when she got sick, the three of us said all the right things. We sat in that same kitchen, and we held hands, and we said, "We're in this together. We're a family. We'll take care of her." And then everyone went home, and I'm the one who stayed. It started small, the way these things always do. The first year, it was just driving her to appointments. My mother had been diagnosed with a slow, cruel illness, the kind that takes years, that takes the body one quiet piece at a time, that asks more of the people around it every single month. At first, she could still do most things herself. She just couldn't drive anymore. So I drove. I lived 20 minutes from her house. Daniel was a 4-hour flight away. Megan was 2 hours by car. So the math of it was simple, and nobody ever said the math out loud, but everybody understood it. I was the one with time. I was the one nearby. I was the one without kids of my own, without a husband, without a pool. I had time, and time was the thing my mother needed, and so it became mine to give. I remember the first appointment I drove her to. She held my hand in the waiting room, and she said, "I hate that you have to do this." And I said, "Mom, I want to do this." And I meant it. God, I meant it. By the second year, it was more than driving. It was the medications. There were 11 of them by then. 11 different bottles. Some in the morning, some at night, some with food, some never. One that had to be cut in half with a little plastic cutter that I bought at the pharmacy. I made a chart. I laminated it. I taped it to the inside of her kitchen cabinet so that on the days my head was foggy from being up half the night, I wouldn't make a mistake. I learned how to read the look on her face that meant she was in pain, but didn't want to say so. I learned which days were good days and which days she would not get out of the chair. I learned how to lift her without hurting her, and how to lift her without hurting myself, which is a different skill entirely. And I learned it because there was no one else there to lift her. By the third year, it was everything. I want to give you the real texture of it, because I think people imagine caregiving as something soft and sad, a hand held by a bedside, gentle music. And some of it was that, but most of it was logistics. Most of it was 100 small, ugly tasks that nobody tells you about and nobody thanks you for. There was the night the bathroom flooded at 2 a.m. because the old pipes finally gave out and Mom was frightened by the noise. And I had to get her calm and back into bed before I could even find the water shutoff in the dark. In a basement I'd never had a reason to go into. I called a plumber the next morning and paid him out of my own account. Because the household money was complicated, and I didn't want to bother anyone about it at 7 a.m. It was $400. I never mentioned it to Daniel or Megan. It didn't occur to me to. There was the grocery shopping every few days, the specific things she could still eat, and the long list of things she couldn't. There was the laundry, which doubled and then tripled. There were the phone calls to the insurance company. And if you've ever spent 2 hours on hold with an insurance company while a meal burns on the stove and your mother calls your name from the other room, you know a particular kind of tired that doesn't go away when you sleep. There was the day her regular doctor retired, and we had to start over with someone new. And I spent a whole afternoon in a waiting room with a folder of her records on my lap, explaining 3 years of history to a stranger because Mom got too winded to talk for long. I'd become the keeper of all of it. Every dose, every date, every name. If I disappeared, the whole structure of her care would have collapsed in a day, and we all knew it, and nobody ever said it. And here's the thing. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I chose it. Every day, I chose it, and I'd choose it again. I'm telling you because of what came later, because the people who would, in the end, divide up everything she owned were the same people who never once had to find a water shutoff in the dark. Daniel called on Sundays. To be fair to him, he called almost every Sunday. He'd talk to Mom for 10 minutes, 15 on a good day, and she would light up. She would tell me afterward how wonderful he sounded, how busy he was, how proud she was of him. And then he'd ask to talk to me, and he'd say, "How's she doing really?" And I'd tell him, and he'd say, "Man, that's tough. You're a saint. You know that? I don't know how you do it. You're a saint." I heard that sentence more times than I can count, from both of them. And I came to understand that it was not a compliment. It was a door closing. It was the polite way of saying, "This is yours now. You're so good at it. We could never." Megan visited. I'll give her that too. She'd come maybe once every couple of months, on a Saturday, and she'd bring flowers and a coffee, and she'd sit and talk to Mom for an hour. And Mom loved it. And I loved seeing Mom love it. And then around lunchtime, Megan would look at her watch and say she had to beat the traffic. And she'd hug me at the door, and she'd say, "I really don't know how you do it. You're amazing." There was one visit I think about a lot. Megan came on a Saturday, and Mom was having a good day, sitting up, color in her cheeks, telling old stories. And Megan posted a photo of the two of them on her social media that afternoon, smiling, her arm around Mom. The caption said something like, "Cherishing every moment with this incredible woman. Family is everything." It got over 100 likes. People wrote, "How sweet. What a wonderful daughter. Your mom is lucky to have you." And I remember looking at that photo on my phone that night. After I'd given Mom her evening medications and helped her to the bathroom and changed the sheets and sat with her until she fell asleep. And I didn't feel angry, exactly. I felt invisible. Because the photo was true. Megan was there that day. She did love Mom. But it was also the whole story, as far as the world was concerned. The good daughter and the incredible mother. And nowhere in that story was the chair I slept in, or the 11 bottles, or the basement in the dark. That story didn't need me. It was complete without me. And then she'd drive back to her house with the pool, and I'd go back inside, and it would be the two of us again. Me and Mom. The way it almost always was. Here is the thing I learned about families during those years, and I think it's true for a lot of families, not just mine. There's a story a family tells about itself, and once that story is set, it's almost impossible to change. The story in our family was that Daniel was the successful one. Megan was the settled one, the one who'd done everything right, marriage and house and the rest. And I was the one with time. That was my role. Not the smart one, not the successful one, not the settled one. Just available. The one who could always come over. The one whose schedule didn't really count. Because what did I have going on anyway? I missed a promotion at work because of it. There was an opening to become the lead hygienist at my practice. More money, more responsibility, a real step up. But it would have meant longer hours, fixed hours, and I couldn't do fixed hours. Because if Mom had a bad night, I needed to be able to leave. so I didn't apply. I told my boss it wasn't the right time. He gave the position to someone with less experience than me, and I smiled and congratulated her. And I drove to my mother's house that evening and made dinner. I stopped dating. There was a man, kind, patient, genuinely good, and we went out for almost 6 months, and he was understanding about the cancellations, the late-night phone calls, the weekends I disappeared. He was understanding, right up until he wasn't. I feel like I'm third in line, he told me once, gently, not as an attack. Behind your mom, and behind your brother and sister, who never seemed to do anything. And the worst part is he was right. He was completely right. I just couldn't fix it. So that ended too. I'm curious what you think. If your siblings never showed up like this, would you have said something by now? Tell me in the comments. There was one moment that summed the whole thing up. About a year before Mom died, Daniel and Megan had a phone call. The three of us, on a group call, which was rare. And they wanted to talk about the long-term plan. Those were the words, the long-term plan. And I got hopeful for just a second because I thought, finally, they're going to help. Maybe they'll hire someone to come a few days a week. Maybe they'll split the cost. Maybe one of them will offer to take a turn. And what they actually wanted to talk about was whether it might be time to think about a facility, a nursing home. They said it gently. They said it was about what was best for Mom. And maybe in some other family, it would have been the right call. But the way they said it, Daniel from his airport lounge, Megan from her kitchen, it landed on me like a request. Because they both knew, without saying it, that as long as I was willing to do it, nobody would have to pay for anything or change anything. And I said, she wants to stay home. I can manage. And there was this little silence on the line, this relieved little silence. And Megan said, "Are you sure? We don't want you to burn out." And I said I was sure. And the subject was closed. And the long-term plan stayed exactly what it had always been. Me. And the whole time, the family story stayed exactly the same. At the holidays, and they did come for the holidays, both of them, Daniel and Megan, with their spouses and Megan's kids, they would sit in my mother's living room, the living room I had cleaned that morning, eating the food I had cooked. And they would talk about how busy their lives were. And someone would always say, warmly, like it was the kindest thing in the world, "And Hannah's been such a help. Honestly, what would Mom do without her?" And I'd be in the kitchen, washing the dishes, listening, and I'd think, that's right. What would she do without me? None of you know. None of you have any idea. The last Christmas she was well enough to enjoy, I cooked for 9 people. I'd been up since 5 getting the turkey in, and I'd done it on 3 hours of sleep because Mom had had a rough night. And I'd already given her the morning medications and helped her dress in the good blouse she wanted to wear. And the house looked beautiful, and the food was good, and everyone said so. And at one point, Daniel raised a glass and gave a little toast. He's good at toasts. And he thanked Mom for bringing us all together. Like always. Like always. As if the table had set itself. As if the meal had appeared. And Mom caught my eye across the room while he said it. And she gave me this look. This small, private look. And I understood later that she saw the whole thing. She saw it all along. She just didn't say anything either. Not then. We were 2 quiet people who both saw the same thing and said nothing. But I never said it. I want you to remember that I never said it, because that's going to matter later. My mother died on a Tuesday in October, just before dawn. I was there. Of course I was there. I had been sleeping in the chair beside her bed for the last 11 days, the way you do at the end. When the days get short and you can feel it coming. I held her hand. Her breathing changed, the way the hospice nurse had told me it would, and then it slowed, and then it stopped. And the room was very quiet, and the sun wasn't even up yet. I called Daniel first. It was the middle of the night where he was. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. And when I told him, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Okay. I'm so sorry, Hannah. Are you okay?" And I said yes, even though I wasn't. And he said he'd get on the first flight he could.
I called Megan. She cried. Real crying. And I believed it.
Whatever else I'm going to tell you about my sister, she loved our mother. And her grief that morning was real. She said she'd come right away. They both came. Within 2 days, they were both there. And there were tears, and there were hugs. And for about 36 hours, the 3 of us were actually a family again. We sat in that kitchen, and we cried, and we told stories about Mom, and we laughed at the good ones. And I remember thinking, even through everything, even through the exhaustion that had soaked all the way into my bones, I remember thinking, maybe this is the thing that fixes us.
Maybe losing her brings us back together. I was so tired. I think that's why I let myself believe it.
The shift was so small, I almost missed it. It happened on the 2nd evening. We were sitting around the table, and Megan had a notepad out. She always had a notepad. She was organized that way. And she was making a list of things that needed to be done. The service, the flowers, who to call. And there was something almost comforting about watching her organize it, because for 3 years, I'd been the one who organized everything. And for one evening, it was nice to let someone else hold the pen. And then, very naturally, in the same gentle list-making voice, without even looking up from the notepad, she said, "And we should probably get someone out to look at the house, just to get a sense of the value before we list it." My mother had been gone for less than 48 hours. She wasn't even buried yet. And my sister was already talking about selling the house, talking about it as a settled thing, a thing that was obviously going to happen, the way you'd talk about canceling a magazine subscription. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, good idea. Strike while the market's decent." Then he caught himself, glanced at me, and added, "I mean, when everyone's ready." No rush. But there was a rush. I could feel it in the room, like a change in the air. The grief was real. I'm not saying it wasn't. But underneath the grief, something else had already woken up. Something that was already counting. Over the next few days, before the will reading, I watched that something grow. It was never ugly. Nobody fought. But I noticed Megan walking through the house with her phone out, not taking pictures of memories, but taking pictures of rooms. I noticed Daniel on the back porch one evening on a call, and I caught the end of it as I brought him a coffee. Yeah, 4 bedrooms, decent lot. We'll probably move quick on it. I noticed the 2 of them one afternoon, standing in Mom's bedroom, going through her jewelry box together, deciding things, and they didn't ask me to join them. And when I came to the door, Megan said, "Oh, we're just sorting Mom's things." "Don't worry about it. We've got it. Don't worry about it." As if her things were not also mine to grieve. As if I were a guest. I didn't say anything. I got up and put the kettle on. I'd gotten very good over 3 years at not saying anything. The will reading was 11 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, in the office of my mother's lawyer. I'd been to that office once before, but I'll come back to that. For now, picture the room. A long table, dark wood, the kind of room that smells like paper and old coffee. Big windows. A lawyer named Mr. Ellison, an older man, soft-spoken, careful, with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. My mother had used him for years. I didn't know him well. None of us did, really. We sat down. Daniel and Megan sat together on one side, near the head of the table, with their spouses behind them. I sat further down, near the door, alone. Nobody told me to sit there. I just did. It's where I'd learned to sit. Mr. Ellison cleared his throat and began. I won't pretend I understood every word. There was a lot of formal language at the start. But the part everyone was waiting for came soon enough. And when it came, it was very clear. The house, my mother's house, the house I had driven to 1,000 times, the house I had cleaned and cooked in and slept beside her in, went to Daniel and Megan, split between them, 50-50. The savings, too. My mother had more saved than I'd realized, a little over $140,000. The result of a lifetime of working 2 jobs and never spending $1 she didn't have to. A lifetime of clipped coupons and a 15-year-old coat. All of it split between the 2 of them. And I watched their faces while Mr. Ellison read the numbers, and I watched them do the quiet arithmetic. $70,000 each from the savings, and then half a house in a market that was decent. I could see Daniel already spending it. I could see Megan thinking about her pool, her kids' schools, the kitchen she'd been wanting to redo. They were grieving, and they were calculating at the exact same time. And I don't think they even noticed they were doing both. And then Miss Ellison looked down the table at me, and he read the line about the shed. To my daughter, Hannah, he read, I leave the garden shed at the rear of the property, and its contents. And that was it. That was my line. He read it gently. I'll give him that. There was nothing unkind in how he said it. But the words were the words. For a second, the room was silent. And then my brother laughed, the small laugh, the breath through the nose. And he said the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. He turned to me, and he wasn't even being especially cruel. That's the thing. He said it almost kindly, like he was doing me a favor by explaining it. Come on, Hannah. Don't look like that. You basically lived here rent-free for 3 years. You got your inheritance already. The rest of us actually have lives to pay for. Rent-free. 3 years of my life. The promotions I didn't take, and the man I didn't keep, and the 11 bottles of medication, and the chair I slept in for 11 nights. Rent-free. Megan didn't laugh, but she didn't disagree either. She reached over and patted my hand, the way you'd pat a child, and she said, He's not wrong, Han. And honestly, what would you even do with the house? You couldn't afford to keep it up. This is for the best. For everybody. I looked at the 2 of them. I looked at the single page in front of me. And I felt something in my chest that I had never felt before in my whole life. And I want to be very honest with you about what it was, because it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't rage. It was the opposite of rage. It was a kind of stillness, A cold, clear, quiet stillness, like the surface of a lake at 5 a.m. before anyone's awake. I folded my hands in my lap, and I said nothing at all. Now, I have to tell you about the other time I'd been in that office. The time months before that I'd almost forgotten about, that I hadn't thought to mention to anyone, because to me, it had been nothing. It was the previous spring, one of Mom's better stretches, when she could still get around with a cane and a lot of patience. She'd asked me one morning, very casually, over breakfast, if I could drive her downtown that week. "I have some boring paperwork to sort out," she said. "Just some old people things, wills and accounts, nothing exciting," I said. Of course. I drove her plenty of places. This was just one more. I didn't think twice about it. We went to Mr. Ellison's office on a Wednesday. I helped her up the steps and into the waiting room. And then, and this is the part I want you to notice, she asked me to wait outside while she went in. "It's all dull legal nonsense," she said, patting my arm. "You don't need to sit through it. Go get yourself a coffee, sweetheart. I'll be a while." So I did. I sat in a coffee shop down the street for almost 2 hours, reading something on my phone, refilling my cup, not thinking about it at all. And when she was done, I drove her home, and she was quiet in the car. And I asked if everything was okay. And she said, "Everything's exactly the way I want it now." And she squeezed my hand. And I thought she meant she'd finished her boring paperwork. I really did think that's all it was. There's one small thing I remember from that day, and it didn't mean anything to me then, but it means everything to me now. When she came out of Mr. Ellison's office, she was holding her purse a little tighter than usual, and she said, almost to herself, "Good. That's done." And then she turned to me in the car, and she said something strange. She said, "You know I see you, don't you? Even when I don't say it. You know that." And I laughed because I thought she was being sentimental, the way she got sometimes on the hard days. And I said, "I know, Mom. I see you too. Now let's get you home." I had no idea she was telling me, in the only way she could without giving away the surprise, that she had just spent 2 hours making sure the world would see it too. I never asked what she signed that day. It honestly never crossed my mind. Why would it? She was my mother, sorting out dull legal nonsense. I had 11 bottles of medication to keep track of. I had bigger things to worry about than paperwork. I had completely forgotten about that Wednesday until I was sitting in that same office 11 days after her death, holding a single page that said I'd been left a shed. And even then, even sitting right there, I didn't connect it. I want to be honest about that too. I didn't sit there thinking, aha, the secret. I just felt that cold stillness, and I folded my hands, and I waited for the meeting to be over so I could go home and finally fall apart in private. I had no idea that my mother, months before, in a room I'd been asked to wait outside of, had already done something. Something she'd planned carefully and told no one, and arranged so that it could not be undone. She knew her children. All 3 of us. She'd had years to watch us, and she had watched, very carefully, who actually showed up. People always think the moment of injustice is the loud moment. The shouting, the slammed door, the scene. But the realest moment in this whole story was completely silent, and it happened inside my own head, at that table. While my brother and sister gathered up their thick folders and started murmuring to each other about square footage and listing agents. I sat very still and I felt myself stop hoping. That's the only way I can describe it. For 3 years, really for my whole life, some small part of me had been hoping that one day they'd notice. Hoping that the family story would change, that someone would finally say, out loud, in front of everyone, "Hannah, you did the hard thing. The thing none of the rest of us would do. And we see it. And we're sorry. And thank you." And sitting in that office, with that one thin page in my hands, I felt that hope quietly switch off. Not with a bang, with a click. Like a lamp in an empty room. And here's the strange part. When the hope switched off, I didn't feel emptier. I felt clearer. The exhaustion was still there. The grief was still there. But the noise underneath it, the wanting, the waiting to be seen, that went quiet. And in the quiet, I could finally think. I wasn't going to fight them. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories usually go. I wasn't planning a scene. I wasn't going to stand up and list my grievances. What would have been the point? You can't argue someone into loving you. You can't present evidence and win back 3 years. So I made a small, simple decision, right there at the table. I decided I would take my shed. I would say thank you. I would go home. And I would let the two of them have exactly what they'd asked for. Every square foot of it. And I would not give them the gift of my anger on top of everything else. I unfolded my hands. I sat up a little straighter. And I started, calmly, to gather my coat. And that's the moment. The exact moment I'd made my peace and decided to walk away with nothing, that Mr. Ellison said the words that changed everything. "Before everyone goes," he said, "there's one more thing." I was halfway out of my chair. I sat back down. Daniel looked up from his phone, mildly annoyed. The way you look at a flight attendant who's keeping you in your seat a little too long. "We're all set, right?" It seemed pretty clear. Mr. Ellison took off his reading glasses, folded them, and set them down on the table. And something in the way he did it, slow, deliberate, like a man who has been waiting a long time for this exact moment, made the room go quiet again. "The document I just read to you," he said, "is your mother's last will and testament. It is valid, and it is exactly as she wrote it." He paused. "But your mother left me a second instruction, a separate sealed envelope, and she was very specific about it." He reached into a drawer beside him and took out an envelope. It was a plain envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with my mother's handwriting on the front. I knew her handwriting anywhere. I'd seen it on 1,000 grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. My chest tightened just looking at it. Her instruction, Mr. Ellison continued, was that this envelope was not to be opened until after the main reading was complete, and that it was to be opened here, in this room, out loud, in front of all 3 of her children at once. She was insistent on that last part. All 3 of you, together, no exceptions. Megan frowned. "What is it?" "I don't know the full contents," Mr. Ellison said. "I drew up the will, but this," he tapped the envelope, "your mother prepared with another lawyer, and with me only as the keeper of it. She wanted it that way. She wanted to be certain it could not be challenged or lost or quietly set aside. I am simply doing what she asked." He looked around the table, at Daniel, at Megan, and finally for a long moment at me. She asked me to read it slowly, he said, so everyone would understand. And he broke the seal. The envelope held two things: a letter in my mother's handwriting, and a second, formal document, several pages, with a blue legal cover and a notary stamp on it. Mr. Ellison read the letter first. To my 3 children, he read, "If you are hearing this, then I'm gone, and the will has been read, and you each know what it says. I need you to understand that the will says exactly what I wanted it to say. Nothing in it was a mistake." He paused and turned the page. The will gives my savings to Daniel and to Megan, and it speaks of the house as though it were mine to give. I wrote it that way on purpose, and I want to explain why, so that no one in this room misunderstands. I wrote it that way because I wanted to see something. I wanted to hear what each of you would do and say in that room before you knew the whole truth. I'm sorry for that. It's a hard thing for a mother to do, but I had my reasons, and you'll understand them in a moment. I remember the room being absolutely silent. Megan had gone very still. Daniel had put his phone face down on the table. Mr. Ellison kept reading, his voice steady and slow, just as she'd asked. 3 years ago, when I got sick, I told all 3 of you, and you all said the same beautiful things. We're a family. We're in this together. And then 2 of you went home, and 1 of you stayed. I felt my breath catch. Hannah stayed. Hannah drove me to every appointment. Hannah learned my medications, all 11 of them, and never once got them wrong. Hannah slept in a chair beside my bed for the last 11 nights of my life, so that I would not be alone in the dark. Hannah gave up a promotion she never told me about. Yes, sweetheart, I found out. Mothers always find out. And a young man who would have been good to her, because she would not leave me. She never complained, not once, and she never asked me for a single thing. Mr. Ellison's voice didn't waver, but I saw him glance at me over the top of the page. "So here is what I did," he read. "Last spring, while I could still think clearly and act on my own, I went to a second lawyer, separate from this office, and I moved the house, the real house, the land and the building, into a trust. A living trust, set up properly, witnessed, notarized, and completely legal. The will you just heard transfers what was left in my ordinary estate, but the house itself was no longer mine to leave in that will. Months ago, I placed it into a trust whose sole beneficiary and whose trustee upon my death is my daughter Hannah." The room did not just go quiet. It went airless. "What that means in plain language," Mr. Ellison said, lowering the letter for a moment to look directly at my brother and sister, "is this. The savings are yours, Daniel and Megan, exactly as the will states. Your mother divided those between you, and that stands. But the house does not pass through the will at all. It passed into the trust last spring. As of your mother's death, the house belongs in full and free of any claim to Hannah." Nobody moved. He lifted the letter again. There was one more paragraph. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry, Megan. I love you both, and I am not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because a house is not a thing you sell. It's a thing you keep warm. And only one of my children knew how to keep me warm. The shed was a little test, and I'm sorry for the unkindness of it. But I needed to hear, with my own arrangements, what each of you would say before you knew.
Now you know. Hannah, the shed is yours too, by the way. There's a key in it to the back door of your house. Your house. Welcome home, sweetheart. Mr. Ellison set the letter down.
The second document, he explained quietly, was the trust itself, the notarized, witnessed record of what my mother had done the previous spring, on a Wednesday.
In an office I'd been asked to wait outside of.
Daniel found his voice first. He's a salesman. Finding his voice is what he does. That can't be right, he said. She was sick. You can't just move a house out from under a will.
We'll contest it. And he looked at his wife, and his wife looked at the floor.
Mr. Ellison didn't get defensive. He just nodded slowly, like he'd expected the question, because of course he had. My mother had expected it too.
You can certainly speak to a lawyer of your own, he said. That's your right.
But I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you what they'll find. Your mother created this trust last spring, 8 months before she passed, on a day she came in on her own and answered every question clearly. We had a doctor's letter to her capacity, dated that same week. She insisted on it, precisely so this could not be argued later. There were 2 independent witnesses. It was notarized. The property was retitled into the trust at the county office months ago. The record is public, and it's been sitting there in plain view the whole time. Your mother did not do this in a fog at the end. She did it carefully, early, and in sound mind, specifically so that no one could undo it. I'm sorry. There's nothing here to contest. And that was the part that landed on Daniel, not the loss of the house, I think. The realization that our mother, the woman he called for 15 minutes on Sundays, had quietly outthought all of it, months ago, while he was busy. That she'd seen exactly how this room would go, and built something none of us could break, and set it aside, and waited. Everything she'd signed that day, while I drank coffee down the street and thought about nothing at all. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because it surprised me. I'd just been handed the thing I'd never let myself want. The house. My mother's house. And more than the house, proof. Proof. Read aloud. In my mother's own words. In front of the only 2 people in the world whose opinion of me had ever made me feel small. She had seen me. The whole time, she had been seeing me. She just hadn't said it while she was alive, because she was saving it. She was saving it for this exact room. And I had every right in that moment to turn to my brother and sister and say 30 years of true things. I could have reminded Daniel about rent-free. I could have reminded Megan about what would you even do with the house. I could have laid the whole catalog out on that table. Every Sunday phone call that ended with, "You're a saint." Every visit that ended at lunchtime. Every holiday I spent in the kitchen while they talked about how busy they were. I could have made them sit there and listen to all of it. I'd earned that. I think anyone would say I'd earned that. I looked at the 2 of them. Daniel's face had gone gray. He was staring at the table. Megan had her hand over her mouth again. But this time, her eyes weren't laughing. This time, they were wet, and they were darting around the room, and I realized she was waiting. They were both waiting. Waiting for me to do to them what they had just spent 3 years quietly doing to me. Waiting for me to finally take my turn and be cruel. And I found that I didn't want it. Not because I'm a saint. I want to retire that word forever. Not because I'm better than them,
But because I had just spent 3 years learning at my mother's bedside exactly how short a life is and exactly how little time there is, and I was not going to spend any of mine on this. I'd spent enough already. So I stood up, I gathered my coat, and I said the only thing I said in that entire room. I looked at my brother and my sister, and I said, quietly, without any anger in it at all, I hope the money helps. Truly. And the door's always open if you ever want to come by the house. Mom would have liked that. That was all. No list, no grievances, no turning of the knife. And it landed harder than any cruel thing I could have said. Because there was nothing in it for them to push back against. I hadn't attacked them. I'd offered them my mother's open door, the same door I'd kept open for 3 years while they stayed away. And in offering it kindly, I held up a mirror they could not look away from. Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. Megan started crying, really crying, and she said, "Hannah." And then she didn't have anything to follow it with, because there wasn't anything to follow it with. I picked up my single thin page. I picked up the trust document Mr. Ellison handed me and the heavy iron key that had been waiting in a sealed envelope for months. And I walked out of that office into the gray October afternoon, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt light. That was 8 months ago now. I didn't sell the house. I think you probably already knew I wouldn't. I moved in that winter. It took some doing. I had to give up the apartment above the laundromat, which I don't miss. And I had to learn how to take care of a house, which I'm still learning. The gutters need clearing in the fall. The boiler makes a sound I've decided not to worry about. There's a draft in the back bedroom that I've stuffed with a rolled-up towel, the same way my mother used to. I kept her kitchen mostly the way it was. The laminated medication chart is gone. I took it down the first week, folded it, and put it in a drawer, because I couldn't quite throw it away. But her handwriting is still on the inside of some of the cabinet doors, little notes to herself. And I've left those exactly where they are. The garden shed, my official inheritance, the thing they laughed about, turned out to have her old gardening tools in it, and her gloves, still shaped like her hands. In the spring, I cleaned it out, and I planted the beds along the back fence the way she used to. Tomatoes, mostly. They're coming in now. I picked the first ripe one last week and ate it standing in the yard, still warm from the sun. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't cry a little. There was one more thing in the shed, too. Tucked on the shelf above the workbench, inside an old seed tin, there was a small folded note in her handwriting. Just a few lines. It said, "Hannah, if you're reading this in here, then it worked. And the house is yours, and you finally got to sit down. Plant the tomatoes. Stop cleaning everyone else's plates. Love, Mom." That was it. That was the actual content of the shed they laughed about. She'd hidden the truest thing she ever said to me in the one place she knew the others would never bother to look. I keep that note in my wallet now. I've read it so many times the fold is starting to wear through. Daniel and I talk now, a bit. Not like before. There's no going back to before. But he called me a few months ago, awkward, and apologized. A real apology, no excuses in it, which I didn't expect from him. He said the thing he keeps thinking about isn't the house. It's that I never once asked them for help, and they never once offered, and he's only now understanding what that meant. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I meant it. Megan comes by sometimes. She took me up on the open door. She brings her kids, and they run around the yard where Mom used to sit, and I let them pick the tomatoes. And it's not perfect, but it's something. The last time she was here, she stood in the kitchen for a long while, looking at Mom's handwriting on the cabinet doors. And she didn't say anything. And she didn't have to. And if you stayed all the way to the end, thank you. If these stories help your English, the links in the description can help you practice more. People ask me sometimes, the few people I've told, whether I'm angry, whether I resent the years. And the honest answer is no, I'm not. Because here's what I finally understand. Sitting in my mother's kitchen, in the quiet, with the dryers no longer spinning under my floor, they got the savings. I got the warm house and the garden and the 8 months I'll have with my mother's handwriting on the cabinet doors and the proof, in her own words, that she saw exactly who I was the whole time. I think I got the better end of it. I think I got it years ago, actually, on all those ordinary nights nobody saw. The folder they slid across the table to me was thin enough to fold in one hand. It turned out to be the only one in the room that was full.